The silk thread snapped. The sharp ping echoed in the small room, but it was drowned out by the internal vibration in Lou's chest. A frantic, low-frequency buzzing that had been growing for 20 years. He stared at the broken ends, his fingers twitching against the wooden frame. The silence of the room was heavy, suffocating. He saw his father's face as it had looked 2 decades ago. Lips curled in judgment. "You never speak clearly enough," the old man had barked. Lou had screamed back, "You never listen." The memory hit him with the force of a physical blow. He turned his head. His wife stood in the doorway, her hands gripping the frame, her eyes hollowed out by years of waiting for a response that never came. He opened his mouth to bridge the distance, but the buzzing in his chest surged, a wall of static that made speech impossible. He could not find the words. He could not breathe. With a sharp shove, he pushed his stool back, grabbed his bag from the floor, and stepped past her without a look. He walked out into the biting mountain air, leaving the silence of the house behind him. The mountain loomed ahead, its peak hidden in shifting clouds. Lou reached the base, his breath hitching in the thin, cold air. Near the path, a man sat motionless, his face mapped with deep, age-worn lines. "I am Karma," the man said, his voice barely rising above the wind. Lou did not stop walking. "I am here to finish my past," he replied, his voice strained. Karma let out a dry, rattling laugh that seemed to vibrate against the stones. "You cannot finish what was never meant to be closed. Climb." Lou stepped onto the path, his boots crunching against loose shale. With every 10 paces, the air grew heavy, shimmering like a heat haze. He climbed until his muscles burned. Then, the silence broke. A faint whisper brushed against his ear, his father's voice, sharp and accusing, echoing from the rocks. He shook his head, but the sound intensified. A second voice joined, the thin, tired plea of his wife, weaving through the wind. He stumbled, his hands clawing at the empty air to steady himself. He was no longer climbing alone. The ghosts of his own making were rising to meet him, filling the path with the weight of 20 years. The buzzing in his chest exploded into a roar, a cacophony of accusations that turned the mountain path into a gauntlet of sound. Lou fell to his knees, his fingers digging into the hard, cold earth. He heard his father's voice, cold and sharp, dissecting his failures. He heard his wife's voice, a thin thread of longing that snapped under the weight of his own neglect. He swung his arms wildly, trying to swat the air, trying to silence the ghosts, but the static only grew louder. He looked up and saw a hermit sitting on a jagged rock, weaving reeds with calm, rhythmic movements. Liu crawled toward him, gasping for breath. "I want to be free," he choked out, his voice thin against the gale. The hermit did not pause. His fingers continued to dance through the fibers. "You are trying to silence a song," the hermit said, his voice steady. "Let the wave crest. Let the bird fly." Lou froze. He stopped clawing at the air. He closed his eyes, forcing his heart rate to slow. He stopped fighting the noise and started to listen. Beneath the roar, he found the cracks. He heard his father's fear hidden in the harsh judgment. He heard his wife's plea for connection buried deep within the quiet. The roaring began to fade, replaced by a rhythmic, pulsing clarity. The final stretch was a blur of gray stone and thinning air. Lou pulled himself over the last ledge and collapsed onto the flat, wind-swept plateau. The summit was silent, save for the low whistle of the wind through the crags. A woman sat at the center, motionless as the rock beneath her. She did not look at him, but her presence filled the space. "Where did the voices go?" Lou whispered, his throat raw. "They were only echoes of your own fears," she replied, her voice steady and clear. "Speak to them in the silence." Lou stood, his legs trembling. He looked toward the horizon, where the mountain met the sky. He inhaled deeply, drawing the thin, cold air into his lungs. He shouted. He poured 20 years of resentment, failure, and unspoken longing into the void. He shouted his regrets until his voice cracked, then fell into a sudden, absolute quiet. He waited. Instead of the familiar buzzing, a warmth ignited deep in his chest. It surged outward, steady and rhythmic. He pressed his hand against his ribs and felt it his own heart, beating with a calm, deliberate power that silenced every phantom. The chaos was gone. He closed his eyes and breathed, finally whole. The descent was shorter than the climb. One moment he was navigating the jagged mountain paths, and the next, his boots crunched on the familiar gravel of the village lane. The air here was different, warmer, smelling of wood smoke and damp earth. He walked until the cottage came into view. The door stood slightly ajar. He stopped, his pulse steady, his mind clear of the phantom noise that had defined his life for 2 decades. His wife appeared in the doorway, her gaze fixed on the path. She stood motionless, searching his face. He stepped forward. The buzzing that usually occupied his chest was absent, replaced by a profound, hollowed-out peace. He reached the threshold. She asked where he had been, her voice barely a whisper. "I climbed the mountain," Lou replied. He looked at her, truly seeing the lines around her eyes and the stillness of her stance. He reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cool, grounding. He led her back into the room, and they sat in the quiet. No words were needed. He listened to the house, the clock ticking, the wind outside, the rhythm of their shared breathing. The song of the present moment finally filled the space. He was home.